grateful for the invitation to be here to the TechNation folks, and also for the BMETS organization here in Baltimore for giving me this opportunity to share with you and introduce you to some what is relatively new information about motivation, leadership development, and from our perspective, creating better service outcomes. About 12 years ago, there's been some advances in magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, and functional MRI was developed at about that time. Is anybody familiar with functional MRI? It's used a lot in the neuroscience community. It allows scientists to see the brain with with a level of clarity and accuracy that they've never ever been able to see before with the traditional MRI. And we've learned a lot since then. Again, this has only been invented about 12 years ago. Now the research papers started to come out approximately 6 years ago. And what we've learned about the brain is completely fascinating, and I believe will be the future of leadership development, motivation, and pretty much every aspect of life that we work in, because we've learned what motivates people, what makes people tick. And I'm going to discuss that with you today. I think it'll be helpful to you in some way. I'm going to just be able to skim the surface. My background is in service. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a consumer of neuroscientists. I'm not a producer. My experiences come from primarily Dr. David Rock's research, among others, and the Neuro Leadership Institute, which I'm a student of in New York City. Neuro Leadership Institute teaches coaching and other aspects of business life and personal life from a neuroscience perspective. And we've been wondering for some time what makes people tick. And leaders use a lot of cognitive energy wondering how to motivate people. How do we get people to do and even say what we'd like them to do? How do we motivate them to do good work and so forth? How do we fix people who aren't doing good work? Well, I'm going to introduce you to a new framework, a new leadership model that allows you to affect change, better motivate people, and will lead ultimately to better service outcomes. Fair to say that everybody in this room is a service professional of some kind, and it can apply to you. That framework involves 5 domains of social experiences that our brains treat as survival issues. And it all goes back to when we were roaming around the Serengeti, and we were worried that we were going to be eaten by a saber-toothed cat or a cave bear. Well, we're not worried about those kinds of threats anymore. We are worried about other kinds of threats, and there are 5. We call them the SCARF model. And it describes the rewards and the threats that every single person in this world is concerned about. And as leaders and service providers, we have a basic understanding of those threats. We can do better work. We can better motivate people. We can avoid issues a lot of the times, and it enhances our leadership development. If you are a person in here that has a high degree of desire to develop themselves further, you have a growth mentality, a growth mindset, then this is going to be the biggest tool you can use to accelerate your growth. Because in the process, we become better versions of ourselves than we were yesterday, and therefore become better leaders. This is relevant to you for a couple other this reason as well. Last year, Amy did a survey, and they had 1,400 respondents to their survey, and it was focused on why are HTMs leaving their jobs? And these results came up. How many people here are in a hiring capacity of some kind or a recruiting capacity? Anybody here manage? Yeah. So you're interviewing people. Okay. These 6 reasons that we have up on the board, compensation and benefits, and work environment, I'm not going to read them to you, you can read them, are the 6 primary reasons people leave their hospital and move to another hospital. It could just as easily have been, why do people want to work at a hospital and not work somewhere else? The interesting thing about these, what they discovered, is that these things all apply to what we know as the SCARF model of motivation. And they're listed up there: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. In other words, these 6, and I believe there were a total of 30, I just took the top 6, all are relevant to what we're going to discuss today and what motivates people to do what they do. People are motivated by increasing their status or preserving their status in some way. So if you take a look at this list, you'll see that training and development opportunities give people an opportunity to increase their status. If you don't get training and development opportunities, by the way, they're sending a message that your status might not be that great. Work-life balance, that's a fairness issue, isn't it? So every single one of these major reasons why people leave their positions and move to another hospital can be directly associated with one of the SCARF elements, as it's called. Every one of these has to do with somebody's status, certainty, not giving them autonomy, relatedness to others, and fairness. That's why people leave their jobs. That's also why people accept the position, because they have some faith, they have some certainty that they can achieve all of these goals. Most of them are unconscious. Nevertheless, we all need them, and we strive for them. So if you want to keep and attract good, talented people, I believe this presentation will be helpful to you to some extent. What we're going to learn a bit about here in the next 45 minutes or so are 4 main areas. We're going to understand the importance of our prefrontal cortex and how that plays into our day-to-day work and relating to other people. We're going to talk about the basic principle, operating principle of the brain, how our brain works. That's going to be good to know, because it ties directly into the SCARF model of motivation, the SCARF elements: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Then the last part of it, we're going to talk about what can we do if things aren't going well for us. How can we recover and feel better about ourselves so that we can get to the position where we can be in, have a conversation or deal with a situation that allows us to have a better outcome. How do we calm ourselves, for example? So a basic understanding of the brain makes us far more likely to achieve our goals, and that we're all emotionally motivated by these 5 elements. So the brain runs like a refrigerator. It's very energy consuming. It only weighs about 3 pounds, but it uses about 12 watts of energy a day, and about 20% of our metabolic energy, the energy we put into our body. The prefrontal cortex is important to us as leaders and service providers, because this is where all of our executive functions take place. The prefrontal cortex runs this little sliver of brain in the front, runs around to the side here a little bit to the back. This is where we perform all of our executive level thinking, our planning, our concentration, our inhibitions are controlled in the prefrontal cortex. Our self-awareness is there. All of our executive level thinking is here in the front part of the prefrontal cortex. The beauty of the prefrontal cortex is that it has a very high level of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is our ability for our brain to create new neural networks and strengthen existing ones. It's how we grow. So if we talk about leadership development, and if I have a growth mindset, really what you're saying is I want to improve and strengthen my prefrontal cortex neural circuitry. The thing about the prefrontal cortex is it doesn't operate at maximum optimal capacity very long out of the day. You know, most of us have anywhere from 4 to 6 hours of maximum capacity in our prefrontal cortex. And this is an important thing for each of us as leaders and service providers to understand, because the prefrontal cortex also controls our limbic system. It's we're going to talk about the limbic system here in a moment. But when we're working within our maximum capacity of our prefrontal cortex and we're at our best, maybe we're in the flow state, the prefrontal cortex is perfectly in control of our bodies. We tend to have our greatest insights at that time. We're more patient during that time. We're more agreeable, and we're more likely to look for solutions rather than problems. So let's talk about the limbic system. Basically, the limbic system is the grand central station of emotion. All of our intense emotional reactions take place in this part of the brain. And the little P-shaped, it's actually olive shaped, the amygdala. The neurons in the amygdala are there for one primary purpose: to detect negative things, smells, sights, anything, all of our senses. It's looking for the negative at all time. We have a negativity bias in our brain. Again, that stems back to when we were scurrying around the Serengeti in the day, trying to notice something, some threat, before it has a chance to attack us. And of course, our ancestors who lived through that and who noticed threats got very good at it. And that's the reason why each of us are in the room today. So those threats are still with us. We're not so concerned about physical threats anymore. We're mostly concerned about emotional, social threats of that kind. So let's take a look at closer about how the amygdala works. So on the left side here is the emotion of the emotional part of the brain. And you see that the amygdala is, as I said, the grand central station of the brain. The amygdala in this first frame, or in this first graphic, is detecting a threat of some kind. So it immediately goes out to the rest of the brain and says, hey, there's a threat going on. What are we going to do? We got to get ready. We got to prep ourselves. This is a stress response. The rest of the brain then looks for experiences. Is this true? Could this actually be true? Now, one of the fundamental aspects of the brain is that it regulates, it judges, and it learns. And all these things allow it to conserve cognitive energy. We've evolved to conserve as much energy as we can. And in order to do that, we do need to learn things, and we need to judge things. We need to evaluate situations. So that's what we're seeing in the middle graphic. It's going out to the rest of the brain segments and saying, hey, do we have anything in our history that tells us we really should be worried about what the amygdala has said we're worried about? You can see the amount of time that passes. Now, to us, it doesn't seem like much time, but when we react, it's a world of time. In fact, by the time the prefrontal cortex comes in and says, hey, wait a minute, don't forget it regulates our emotions. The prefrontal cortex finally plays into it. It says, wait a minute, we've had a chance now to evaluate everything. Don't worry about that. Calm down, relax. There's no need to waste any energy on this threat. You can see that it takes seconds. Sometimes it takes even longer for that. And if we're working at optimal brain, prefrontal cortex, during the times of optimal prefrontal cortex operation, it goes much smoothly. We're more relaxed. But if we're outside of that, period. If we're exhausted mentally already, it's late in the day, for example. If we haven't slept well the night before, we don't deal very well with the perceptions that there might be a threat. So what do? We become anxious. We become stressed. We're less patient. We're harder to work with. And we typically we're more likely, we don't plan well. We might not be able to do a repair as well as we hoped. We're more likely to have negative service outcomes or negative outcomes of all kinds if the prefrontal cortex is tired in some way. So it's important for us as leaders and service providers to give some thought. When are the optimal operating hours of my life? For me personally, it's in the morning like this. For some folks, it's maybe mid-morning, afternoon. Some people aren't morning people, so it might be from 10 o'clock until 2, something like that. But for each of you, just give some thought to when yours is, and then you want to schedule things that may be a challenge to you during those time periods. What's the physical response when the amygdala sends a message out and we're experiencing a threat of some kind? Well, one thing I can tell you is that the body reacts, we now know, in very significant ways to stress. The digestive system is the most interesting thing to me. People that are under stress tend to lose their inhibitions because their prefrontal cortex is telling us we need food. We don't have any way of, we have our ability to say, no, we really don't need to eat that donut. We do it because we're tired. So what happens? We end up putting on weight. We put on weight because our digestive system doesn't work very well when we're under stress. So the sympathetic nervous system is connected not just to our brain and our spinal column, but to every one of our organs. There's neurons in our stomach. There's neurons in our heart. They've discovered. They're all connected to the nervous system. So this is what happens when we experience a threat to one of the 5 social domains that are so important to us. There's things that we can do to make it more likely for us to remain calm. First of all, we can exercise and walk when we feel agitated. A lot of science behind the benefits of exercise. And part of the reason for that is that exercise and the motions that are involved in repetitive mode, or the neurons in the part of the brain that's involved in repetitive motions, is the basal ganglia. It's a pattern part of our brain, as I think of it. When the basal ganglia is activated during exercise or simply walking, the prefrontal cortex becomes much less active. They're inversely proportional. So the more we exercise, the less active our prefrontal cortex is. And scientists believe that's essentially equates to a restful period for the prefrontal cortex, and explains why that when we're stressed out at work, when we go to the gym after work, we walk out of the gym feeling much better. And it's not just the fact that we've created chemicals throughout our brain from the exercise itself. It has to do that when we're doing hard work like this, our prefrontal cortex is shut down for the most part, and it has a chance to rejuvenate to some extent. The other thing we can do is breath exercises. A lot of great science behind this. There's a book by James Nestor called Breath. I recommend it for everybody to understand how we breathe. We take our breathing for granted. The brain regulates our breathing. We don't even think about it most of the time. But the fact of the matter is, if we have a basic understanding of how we breathe and how we should breathe, we will be happier. We'll have better insights and do better work. There's a simple exercise to do when you feel calm. You just simply stand with your shoulders back to open up your lungs. Take a deep breath. Take another deep breath, and then breathe out for about 6 seconds. So a breath should be 4 seconds in, approximately, 6 seconds out. If we practice that The science says we will activate our parasympathetic nervous system. It will calm us. So we were little kids. My mom and grandma used to say, Johnny, Johnny, just breathe, breathe. Well, what she was basically saying is this. Oh, one other thing I want to talk about this slide is has to do with hydration. We don't drink enough water. You know, the brain is 80% water, and we need water. We need water. So basically, what you do is you take your body weight, divide it by 30, and that's how many ounces of water you should have every 20 or 30 minutes. So I weigh about 200 pounds. I should be getting about 6 ounces of water every 30 minutes to be optimally hydrated. And it's not, you know, it affects our entire body. It particularly affects our brain. So hydration is one of the simplest things that we can do to think better. And the sooner we do that in the morning, the better off we are. So let's talk about the human drivers and some basic information about the brain. As I said earlier, the brain has three, as complex as it is, the brain has three primary functions. It regulates our body, our systems. It makes judgments. In other words, it analyzes situations and it learns from those situations. Most of it done unconsciously, so we don't have to think about it. So for example, but did anybody, when they walked into this room, actually consider the possibility that there's a snake underneath your chair? No. Why didn't we do that? Because we know, our brains know subconsciously that when you walk into a conference room, that's not what we have to be concerned about. And we would use up incredible amounts of cognitive energy if we had to consider every single danger that might be a possibility to us. That's just a silly example, but that's how the brain works fundamentally. So we've learned over the past, there's nothing there. So even if your amygdala would say, hey, there might be a snake here, the rest of your brain is quickly going, not likely. Don't be concerned. Don't waste any cognitive energy on worrying about snakes. So it regulates our body unconsciously. It learns and it evaluates. What else is it evaluating and learning about? It's learning about maximizing our rewards. What do we do to maximize our rewards? And primarily, though, it's worried about threats. Our brains have a negativity bias. I mentioned that, right? That's the first thing we look for is threats. We do that in a lot of different ways, but we particularly do it when we're looking for any of the SCARF elements, the 5 domains of our social experiences that we're most concerned about as humans. So understanding this driver of our behavior will help us become better leaders, and it'll help us have better service outcomes as well. All of our relationships will improve. So let's talk a little bit about the what I call the SCARF, what's known as the SCARF elements: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Because we have a negativity bias, so you'll hear me even talking about the threats to each of these. We all want status. It drives us. Status is our relative importance to other people. Most people think that, you know, Americans are driven by capitalism, and that's a mistake. What we're really driven by is envy. We want, and capitalism is the way to do it. We want everybody to envy us. Our egos might not tell us that, but the fact of the matter is that's why we buy cars, that's why we get on social media. We want to be envied. We want to be respected and admired by others. In some people, it's very obvious. Other people, it's less obvious. But that's the major driver of our behavior: status. Certainty is our ability to predict the future. If we can't predict the future, we don't know what's going to happen. We become very uptight. We get stressed and anxious. Autonomy is our sense of control over our situation. You know, we all want to be captains of our ship. We don't want to have any more than necessary have someone tell us what we must do. Relatedness is our sense of safety amongst others. We tend to view strangers as foes, as somebody who might be not friendly to us. Why? Because they might affect our status. So if I had a conversation with you, or I tried to have a conversation with you, and you didn't really want to talk with me, nah, I'm not worth it. See, that's the possibility that we have, and why we're not friendlier to each other. It's safer for us just to keep our distance from folks, which is sad. Fairness is our sense of equity. Are the rules being applied fairly across all areas of our life or job, for example? So again, we go back to the Amy survey. Every single one of these is one of the reasons why people leave their jobs. Looking at it from a positive perspective, if you were looking to hire somebody, you would want to make sure that you made it very clear during that interview process that you could help them achieve each one of these 5 social domains if you really wanted to catch their attention. It's the secret. And it's not what is it on Jedi? Jedi powers? It's not Jedi powers. It's just the way we are as human beings. So as leaders, if we satisfy the SCARF elements, we'll have people that think more clearly. They'll have clarity. They'll have insights that help us be successful. They'll have better human interactions. They're going to want to work with people, and they're going to be motivated to do things. They're going to want to do things rather than have to do things. On the other hand, if we create threats to our employees, our colleagues, within our family, we don't think very clearly. We have a hard time doing focused work. So these are the kind of things that will help us as we go about not only our work lives, but our personal lives as well. Will help us become happier, more contented human beings. So what I would do here with folks is think about how each of you are motivated or affected by one of the status elements. Which one is most important to you? Does anybody want to throw their hand up and tell me? Go ahead.
I was thinking that's like stand up or that's right. Wait.
Yep. So that's typically what happens. And if you think about the Amy study, this is exactly what's happening. If we experience a threat to any one of the SCARF elements, what do we want to do? We want to get away from it. And it works on an individual basis as well. If you were unkind to me or I perceived you in some way to be a threat to me, I want to keep my distance from you. It's just human nature. On the other hand, if I'm attracted to you for some reason, and I am, by the way, I want to hang out. I want to talk with you. I want to have dinner with you like we did last night. Okay. So the bottom line is that we are, and oh, by the way, I want to do things for you. Yeah. If you're not creating any threats to me, how can I help you? I want to help you be successful. In other words, if I'm a manager and I'm creating a threat to somebody, I can't expect that person that I'm managing to want to help me in any way. We tend to view foes as enemies, or foes as somebody we don't want to be around. Yep. Yeah, thanks for that. So it's clear, the science is clear that we need to make sure as leaders that we are doing our best to meet these 5 elements, not create any threats. And we often still do that. How many people here enjoy performance appraisals? How many people give performance appraisals? Yeah. So is it the old carrot and stick method? If you really do well next year, you're going to get a raise. If you don't do well, you're not going to get a raise. That's what's known as the carrot and stick method of motivation. It's Science has shown it's not very effective at motivating people to do better work. It simply works. It works for some people, it's true. But overall, the vast majority of people aren't motivated by the carrot and stick method as we thought they were all these years. Yes, sir.
The reason that doesn't work is set your goals, set the expectation. And a lot of managers don't follow up on a quarterly basis or at least a semi-annual basis to say, are you on track? Or you going below what we want? To tell them what they need to do, encourage them, to let them know that you want them to succeed. And I found that has worked marvelously because they know first quarter, okay, I'm falling off, I need to get my numbers up, I need to get this up. So they know they know what to focus on, they know what my expectations are, and they know where they stand. So if you get down to the very last one, they've got pre-evaluations already, sort of know where they're at. So on that fourth one, there is no surprise.
How does that relate to one of the SCAR factors? What are you creating?
Well, I'm creating certainty.
Beautiful.
That we know where they stand and what the expectations are. And a lot of people feel that's fair. You know, to snap on somebody at every year and say, well, you can do this, this, and this. They might not even remember. A year ago what you were supposed to be working on.
Because it's not fair.
Right.
It's a fairness issue. Yeah. I love to hear those stories because as you think about the stories and how they relate to the SCARF elements, you always find the SCARF elements within those stories. And if we use the SCARF elements to develop strategies, using them as guidelines and tools, we will be much better leaders. All right. Let's talk about each one of these in a bit more detail. One of the things that's interesting when it comes to status has to do with how impatience kind of bubbles up because of status. How many people here have been impatient with something at some point in the last week? All right, let's think about that. What was the reason? Was it because you were stuck in traffic? Let's just say it was. Does anybody want to volunteer to tell me a story? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll say we were stuck in traffic driving up here through Virginia, and I can't stand it. No matter how much time you can try to figure out and plan your day to avoid not getting stuck in traffic, it seems to find you, especially with construction.
That's not fair, is it?
No.
Yeah.
So you just want to fly through everything, or you want to try to develop a way to either hope for teleportation to come around to get you from point A to point B so you can avoid traffic, or you can somehow fly over or move cars with your mind.
Wow, what an imagination. That's healthy. Now, being stuck in traffic and the impatience we feel is a threat to our status, frankly. If you think about it. My time is way too valuable to be stuck here in traffic. It's a fairness issue as well, because let's suppose I'm in a hurry to get somewhere, and I didn't give myself enough time to get there. That's my fault. And I get there and I say, hey, I'm sorry I'm late. I was stuck in traffic. I blame it on the traffic. I know darn well I should have left 15 minutes earlier. That's a status hit, possibly. So it's one of the ways that impatience that we all experience from time to time manifests itself in another way other than it as a status hit. One of the things about status is that the social pain we experience is processed by essentially the same neural circuitry that we use when we experience physical pain. So that is fascinating to me. That's why when, in the 8th grade, when Melody Donosky said she didn't love me, I still feel that social pain because it's with me these days. But when I broke my hand in high school, I don't feel that pain anymore. So social pain sticks with us long after physical pain does, even though essentially the same neural circuitry in your brain processes both. The other thing that they've learned about pain, when we go through social pains, the death of somebody, the breakup of a relationship, they've learned that if you take a Tylenol or an aspirin, it actually helps relieve the sadness of the experience. Again, don't think about why, because of the neural circuitry involved. It's essentially the same neural circuitry. So if you have a teenage son or daughter who's going through a bad time with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and they're sad, an aspirin would be helpful. If someone has died, an aspirin can be helpful, and there's some real science behind that. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Acetaminophen? Tylenol. Yep. I've heard aspirin as well. Is aspirin acetaminophen? Does anyone else? Did anyone else hear this same information from someone? I thought it was Tylenol and aspirin, so I don't know what the difference would be. I get it, but
Music center and has both of those in it, has caffeine in it.
hey, if we just take heroin, it removes all of our problems. So a heroin would be the thing, folks. Yeah. So let's suppose when it comes to status, let's think about how that might apply to us as service professionals. How if anybody here has been in the service profession long enough, you've had somebody question the quality of your work. Essentially what they're doing is they're challenging your status. Like, are you good enough? Are you like, why did you do it that way? They're challenging you. So these are some examples here of how status plays into our everyday life. Let's talk a bit about certainty. So any kind of ambiguity creates a danger response. Anybody in here has been a merger, been through a hospital merger or acquisition event here? Did you feel a sense of uncertainty about that and how things were going to be? Did it make you stressed? That's a threat response. Okay. So we need to have certainty in our lives, and when we don't, our parasympathetic nervous system kicks into gear. Our prefrontal cortex has a hard time controlling it, and we're feeling not happy. Right? People want a clear picture of the situation that they're in. One of the things about our brains that is, we are comforted by patterns. We like to know what's going to happen. And if we don't know what's going to happen because of our negativity bias, we will fill in the gaps. We will make stuff up to come to some kind of conclusion. And as service professionals and as leaders, we got to keep in mind that if we don't create the kind of certainty that Joe talked about earlier, the person that you're trying to deal with will make up their own story. They'll make stuff up to come to a conclusion. And because of our negativity bias, how do you think that story is most likely going to go? It's going to be a negative story of some kind, most likely. So it's important that we establish certainty in every aspect of the service. Even if we got to tell somebody, I'm not sure what's going to happen today, but I'll know in 2 days better. So let's talk in 2 days. It's better than just saying, I don't know what's going to happen today. I'll get back to you. Because then you give them the opportunity to create their own story. Oh, is he going to get back to you? I don't know. He said he was, but who knows? He didn't the last time. See what I mean? So establishing expectations creates certainty in our colleagues and in our customers. Certainty and the rhythm of that we get into is very comforting to us. And it's one of the reasons that music is so comforting to us, no matter what kind of music you like. It could be death metal. It has a rhythm. and it's been with us who knows how long. I think they found wooden flutes from 30,000 years ago. So we need that. And if music is in our soul, as I've heard, then it's possible, I think, that our soul is somewhere in our brain, because that's where we're comforted by music and the rhythms of music. We need certainty in order to be happy. When it comes to autonomy, yes, we need to give people as much autonomy as we possibly can, because people are happier when we give them choices, even if we don't have many choices to give them. We let them make the decision. How many people here give blood on a regular basis? Great. What's the question that they ask you before when you sit down to give blood? What arm do you want it taken out of? You ever hear that? Okay. There's neuroscience behind that. And apparently, at some point, someone realized through research, I suspect, that if you ask the person, the donor, which arm they'd like to have the blood removed from, stuck, they experience less pain than if you tell them which one. So that's why they offer you that option. Now they may still choose, the arm with the best veins, but nevertheless they will ask you that question every single time. It's based on real neuroscience. That was somehow measurable to somebody. Autonomy. A lot of people who are my age, especially, may have been micromanaged at some point in their career. It's a terrible experience, and it creates a lot of threat responses. And by the way, we don't do our best work when we're told what to do. One of the things about coaching from a neuroscience perspective is that we work hard for coaching somebody not to tell them what the answer is to their problem or what they want to accomplish. The skill is helping somebody come up with the insights so that they come up with the answer. The neuroscience research shows that if you come up with an answer to the problem, you will likely be more invested in it and want to carry it through than if I were to tell you what to do. Anybody want to tell me why that is? That's true. Go ahead. Exactly right. It's a status thing. It's my idea, and guess what? Boom, I did it. That's exactly right. Yep. So autonomy is a big deal, and as leaders, we need to understand that. As service providers, we need to understand it as well. If we're in a difficult situation with a client or a customer, it's important to give that client or customer as many options as we possibly can to help them determine how the service goes. Now, we might know what we want them to say, so we give them an option, 2 or 3 things, but at least they're choosing and they feel in control. Keep in mind, a lot of these threats and rewards that are involved with the 5 social elements are subconscious. Much of it doesn't even come to our consciousness. So when we give them options, they feel like they are in control to some extent. So offer choices to your customers and your colleagues as much as you can. Relatedness. We all want to be part of a tribe, and we tend to view strangers as potential threats. It's just the way we are, and that comes from the time, again, we were scurrying around the Serengeti trying to wonder if the tribe that has suddenly appeared on the hill is friendly, or are they here to steal our meat and our women and children and kill all the men, right? Well, the safest thing for us to do in those days was to assume that they were threats of some kind. We still have elements of that in our DNA. We tend to cooperate with people that we relate to. So if anybody is doing walkarounds in their hospitals, anyone doing walkarounds? This is how you create that relatedness. We want to get to know people and have them be part of our tribe, even if you only show up for a few minutes and ask how things are going, you will be accepted as part of their tribe. And then when you do have a negative interaction, you're more likely to have a positive outcome because of it. We have mirror neurons in our body. So when we smile, they smile. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody, and I put my hands behind my back, just kind of seeing what would happen. Sure enough, it wasn't long that the person put his hands behind my back, or behind his back. He put him later on. He put him behind mine too. But so that's one of the ways that we relate to other people. Mirror neurons. We smile, they're more likely to smile. We do have, this is an argument for karma. You know, what we give out, we tend to get back in that way. What do we do when there's a new nursing unit manager, or maybe a colleague has joined our department? You know, most places will assign a mentor, and if we don't go meet the VIP customer, then we're risking not developing that relationship early enough so that when an incident or some kind of negative event occurs, we'll be in a better position to make it a positive outcome if we have already established a relationship with that person in some way. Fairness. It seems these days that people with, you know, victim mentality dominate the news. I mean, you can turn on the news and you're going to find somebody who's a victim of some kind, perceiving themselves to be involved in something that's unfair. It's a big driver, unfortunately, of our society these days. And the thing is, they create strong emotional responses, obviously, I believe. In hospital or in any kind of work environment, you know, pay discrepancies, people aren't making it to the other person. Fairness, long work hours and impact the family. Again, going back to the reasons why HTMs will leave their position. It's, the work environment is not good. It's not fair. They're not going. No one's going to deal with it for long, and they're going to try to make an effort to make a change. If they can't make a change, then that affects their autonomy, which makes that just compounds the situation. So fairness is a massive driver of our behavior. One of the ways we can do that is what Joe mentioned earlier. So we create a sense of certainty. Certainty and fairness, I think, are very closely related. If you don't have certainty, people are going to tell you that you're not fair. If you're not establishing expectations, it's easy for someone to say, well, you didn't tell me. Yeah, I didn't know. How am I supposed to know that? We hear that all the time. And so creating expectations is one way to ensure that fairness issues don't come bubbling up. Let's talk about reappraisal and labeling situations. So let's suppose that we are finding something that's going to be negative in some way. My wife, for example, is a teacher. So many of her friends are not real happy when fall comes. They have to go back to school. On the other hand, she has one friend who is a great, we're from Penn State University. Her one friend is a great Penn State football fan. So for her other teacher friend who's a Penn State football fan, it's party time for her when the fall comes. And so she can't wait for the fall to come. So the different perspectives that I've had a chance to see in that regard when it comes to, geez, I'm happy the fall's here because it's, you know, people are going to come to town that haven't seen all year long, and other people being basically depressed because they have to go back to school, which is a sad way to go to work. These are sometimes known as cognitive change strategies as well. If we've had been any kind of leadership development, we would have had some kind of training on those. It's basically looking at things from another person's perspective. One of the things is that to take away here when it comes to this kind of stuff is not to suppress our emotions. And when we suppress emotions, it just builds up more and more and creates additional stress. We need to find an outlet for our negative, the times inevitably when we will experience a threat to one of our scarf elements. One of the ways for that labeling and reappraisal is, or one example I should say, are these guys. So I'm a baseball fan. I have two favorite teams. Three. The Orioles are one. But the Yankees and the Red Sox. So the Yankees are my second favorite team, unless I'm at an Oriole game. But the Yankees are my second favorite team. And the Red Sox, though, are my favorite team. And really the only time I pay attention to baseball is when the Yankees and the Red Sox play on TV at Fenway. That's, to me, a holiday in my house. I like that. It was better when they hated each other a lot more than they do now. The bottom line is, let's suppose I was a hardcore Red Sox fan, and I was appraising these guys. Here's what my tone and attitude would be. Look at these idiots. They're probably, look at them. They're clearly Wall Street fat cats who can afford, to take seats away from kids in the front row. Look how stupid it is that they're wearing those silly hats, those wigs. And what a joke. They're obnoxious too. That guy in the New York Yankees hat, he's even giving them a thumbs down sign. And that guy holding the Babe Ruth sign back there, that's a joke. He should be able to come up with something, better than that. So that's one way of looking at these guys. It's not a very positive way, and it certainly isn't attractive in any kind of way. I'm going to reappraise that whole attitude. I'm going to look at it, even though I'm a hardcore Red Sox fan, I'm thinking, hey man, those guys, they're about my age, part of my tribe. Look how much fun, they're clearly white collar guys. They got wearing their Wall Street. They look like they'd be a lot of fun to have a beer with. And by the way, guys that age have a hard time being silly because it affects their status. But they have no problem putting on those wigs. I'd wear a wig with those guys. I think they'd be fun to watch a baseball game with. They're baseball fans just like me. Yeah, they'd bust on me, but it'd be fun. I know they'd be okay. They look harmless other than obnoxious. But anyhow, so that would be my attitude toward these guys. So the first negative attitude, and then second one, who would you really rather work with or be around? It certainly wouldn't be the person who was incredibly negative of these guys. It would be someone who saw something good and fun about these guys. And aren't they the kind of people we want to be around? So that's one example of how you can label and reappraise somebody in some way that makes them tolerable, at least. All right, folks. Well, thank you. I heard a couple stories here. A couple folks have made some comments. Does anybody else have any comments? I hate to ask that question. I was at a conference a few weeks ago. There were about 400 people in the room, and the one right before me had about 400 people in the room. And the guy said, "Hey, any questions?" And he didn't have a single question. I felt so terribly, and I followed him. So of course, when I said, "Hey, I'm not going to," I saw the last one. No one asked a single question. I'm not going to ask any question. But
when you're thinking about inflation globally, do you see any difference in how that's happening or how people in different points in their career or age, how those five things that affect it can change? That certainly be maybe as employees, mortgage, kids, college, home certainty, they watch them stay.
absolutely.
So can you relate that into maybe where someone may be in their career?
Very perceptive, and you're exactly right. Impermanence. So no one's ever the way they were. I can tell you at Calyx Metrology. So we do test equipment calibrations. We travel, so we come to hospitals and we do their work. Over the years, I've seen exactly that, where we have guys coming in working. They're single. They're in their 20s. They've never traveled before. It's very sexy to be staying in nice hotels and going, to sexy cities like Baltimore Philadelphia. Pittsburgh, right? It's very exciting for, I'm a farm boy at heart. I still get excited about going to big city. Bottom line is though, after a period of time, their life circumstances change. Now they're making some money that they didn't make before. They've got girlfriends. They're becoming more socially developed, and they're becoming more outgoing. So they're attracting people that they didn't attract back home before. So before you know it, they have a girlfriend. Before you know it, they're engaged. Before you know it, they're getting married, and then there's a baby. So maybe 5 years go by, and then that person's life changes. Things change. At one time, it was a big status hit to be able to travel, and I've heard them on the phone. Yeah, I'm staying at a Hilton tonight. That's a big deal to some people. The uncertainty of the job is tolerable. Traveling is an uncertainty, but once they have a girlfriend, even they need certainty. What time will I be home on Friday? What time do you think I'll be back on Thursday? Because I want to make plans to go out to dinner. So they mean different things as we grow and develop, and it's all healthy. But we, as leaders, we need to recognize that, and then we can do our best to make them happy. Frankly, we've had guys where we have not been able to get them off the road. We make our money on the road. That's where we do most of our work. So we require travel. And in that case, I help them find jobs as much as I can to increase their status. So for example, for our guys, I would expect every one of our guys to move into a BMS job. And they do. Our guys get hired by, is anybody here from Geisinger Healthcare System, ISS? Been hired. How about Lebanon VA? They like to scope our guys too. Okay, so we get poached all the time, and I'm proud of that, frankly, because we bring guys in that have not been exposed to this wonderful career field, and by the time they run their course with Calyx and their life circumstances have changed, and they've continued to develop that whole time, then they're perfect for folks who want to train them to be HTMs, and that's something I can only be proud of. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. I've seen that start over in a lot of them.
Yeah. What do you think applies to older people rather than youngers when it comes to the SCARF elements? Certainty. What about status?
Work-life balance, but I think you get to the point where they have some stresses and maybe losing the autonomy or fairness or even status, but you stick around because change is hard. As you get older and you start to feel, it's stable. I think we see less over that.
Yeah, change is hard because it creates so much uncertainty. All right, sir.
Question, going back to the actual science behind the models and the slides, I know kind of from your intro, talking about being a student of the science, is there any particular research papers or anything that you would consider must reads?
I do indeed. I call them life books. So a sizable part of this has come from the work of Dr. David Rock at the Neuro Leadership Institute in New York City. There's another author, Rick Hansen, who talks a lot about neuroscience. I think he's tremendous. So Dr. David Rock, his latest book is Your Brain at Work. Richard Hansen's another one. Andrew Uberman. So Dr. Uberman is from Stanford University. He's a neuroscientist. And he comes up with a lot of wonderful research on his own, and he shares papers as well. He's got a podcast. So you listen to his podcast, it's like sitting into a class. It's a college education itself. And that's the wonders of being living during this time. You know, when I was in my 20s, we had books. Now, and you could learn a lot from books, of course. Now we have podcasts. So as for any of us that travel, you basically could take a college course by listening to some of these podcasts if you select wisely. And it's good. It's a good way, what I call my guys, to use their dashboard time, right, Manny? So those are the ones I would recommend immediately. And I think that they'll give you 75% of what you need to make things better, happier, to be happier, understand things. So, anything else? Thank you, folks, for sticking around. Oh, I do have one. I'm happy to take it too.